Hi, Jim.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
Good. Let me introduce us.
All
I'm
right.
Robert Wright of Blogging Heads TV, and this is The Wright Show. You are Jim Lobe. Among other things, you are the founder and proprietor of the aptly named LobeLog. That's Lobe, which happens to be your last name, Log. Right? Did you
It
think of that
sounded
name yourself, or did you have consultants work
no.
on?
I thought it was clever at the time, which was about 8 years ago. But it kind of reminded me when I was in elementary school. I was made a basketball captain, and I proposed that we be called the View Ridge Globetrotters. But the school didn't go for that, and they called it Lobe's Lemons instead.
Why were you so prominently featured in the name in any way?
You mean on the
Oh, you
block?
started the team?
Oh, no, because I was named a captain.
Oh, you were a captain. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, it's all... So anyway, if you had started Blogging Heads, if you were me, Blogging Heads would be called like Bob Heads or Bobbing Heads or something, right?
Yeah.
This is the way you go about branding things.
I guess I didn't give it that much thought, I have
Yeah.
to say.
Okay, well, anyway, it's actually a good blog. People should look at it. And as it happens, ironically enough, most of the people who write for it are not named Lobe. You're now doing a lot of content on LobeLog about foreign affairs and particularly the Middle East, maybe, but and some domestic politics and the way domestic politics intersects with the Middle East, which will be a lot of our subject today. But it's really become a pretty high volume and higher traffic blog.
I guess, yeah.
Uh-huh.
It's doing pretty well. I'd like to write more, but I spend more of my time soliciting pieces and also translating pieces too, and doing some editing too.
Huh. Well, there's a lot of good stuff there. You're also some kind of fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies, although I think even you forget what kind of fellow you are.
Yes, that's true.
But you're something. And for 30 years, you did something or other with Interpress Service, which involved a lot of coverage of Latin America, I think, maybe.
Well, initially, especially in the 1980s when the U.S. was heavily involved. And it's no accident that a lot of the people who were heavily involved in U.S. policy in Central America in the 1980s have been heavily involved in Mideast policy since 9/11.
Okay, that's a good segue to what we're going to talk about. Why is that no coincidence?
Well, because neoconservatives had their first spring, if you will, during the first administration of the first term of the Reagan administration. And that was kind of most controversially expressed in Central America policy, in major part because the anti-war movement, insofar as it continued to exist in the 70s and early 80s, was more focused on Central America than on other parts of the world where the so-called Reagan doctrine kind of took effect.
Right. So Elliott Abrams would be an example of a neocon who was active back then and, for better or worse, is active today.
Absolutely. And was even more active, arguably, under the George W. Bush administration when he actually had power.
Mm-hmm.
But he held 3 assistant secretaryships during the Reagan administration.
Didn't he commit a felony or something, or am I getting him mixed up with somebody else?
No. He pled guilty to making misrepresentations to the United States Congress with respect to various things. I can't remember whether that particular plea bargain rose to the level of a felony or whether it was classified as a misdemeanor, but he was, for example, disbarred from the New York bar as a result of this, and I think he may have had a period of some kind of probation. But he got off pretty light, I think.
Anyway, that hasn't kept him from remaining influential in mainstream foreign policy circles, including being some kind of fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations. But enough about him. Now, this thing we're going to talk about today, tell me if this is too crude a way to put it. And then once we figure out whether this is the headline or what the headline is, we'll back up and approach it from another angle. But neoconservatives want to get the United States involved in a religious war in the Middle East between Sunni and Shia on the side of the Sunni. Is that too crude a way to put it?
I think it's a bit too crude. I think, they, kind of the most recent iteration was this paper that just came out from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which isn't really per se a neocon organization, but it's definitely kind of part of what's called the Israel lobby. And I mean, that says, well, we should be sure to oppose both Sunni and Shia extremists. The latter are defined, however, as being led by Iran, so that kind of tells you something about their definition of extremist, I suppose. But yeah, it seems that at this particular point, especially with regard to their focus on U.S.-Iran policy and trying to prevent any kind of rapprochement between the United States and Iran, they seem to be buying into the kind of Saudi narrative that Shias led by Iran are on the march and they represent what is perhaps the greatest threat to the United States and U.S. interests, and certainly to Israel at the present time. Mm-hmm. And that by comparison and by implication, ISIS, which is of great concern to them, or which they say is of great concern to them, may be a somewhat lesser threat, and still lesser a threat may be something like Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda's Syrian affiliate, Jabhat al-Nusra. They seem to be kind of preparing the ground for the idea that maybe we should, if not support Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria and various Sunni militias in Iraq, we should certainly permit our Sunni partners, especially Saudi Arabia, Qatar, maybe Turkey, to do so. And that perhaps we should even provide some protection for these various groups against Assad in Syria and Shia militias in Iraq.
And so you're right that this report in particular, this report from YNEP that just came out, does say that both Sunni extremism and Shia extremism, as they define them, are threats, and ISIS is a threat, and we should fight ISIS. But as a practical matter, there are times and places where there seems to be a trade-off between focusing on ISIS and Al-Qaeda on the one hand, the Sunni extremists, and focusing on countering perceived Iranian influence on the other. So one example is Iraq, where Iran and us are both opposed to ISIS, as is the Iraqi government. But if you act on that, as you might naturally be inclined to, you wind up in a kind of de facto alliance with Iran, because Iran supports some of these Shia militia, these Iraqi Shia militias. And so you have to decide, well, wait a second, are we, if we fight ISIS in this way, are we actually abetting Iran? And similarly, in Yemen, if you fight the Houthis, as Saudi Arabia is doing, and we're supporting that right now, if you fight the Houthis because of they are perceived to be kind of a surrogate of Iran, then that cuts into your ability to fight Sunni extremism, because the Houthis are probably the most formidable opponent in Yemen right now of Al-Qaeda, ISIS type folks. So there's an inherent trade-off here. You can talk about the importance of countering both, as this report does, but at the end of the day, you probably have to make some decisions, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of their observations are indeed accurate. I mean, it's certainly true, and I think the administration agrees with some of this. It's certainly true that if you're perceived as supporting Shia militia, who are certainly influenced, if not somewhat directed, by the IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guard, then, and you do this in Al-Anbar province, which is overwhelmingly Sunni, you end up radicalizing Sunnis in the Al-Anbar province and making them more susceptible to ISIS's appeal. I mean, there is certainly a logic to that, and there's certainly a risk to the U.S. being seen as aligning itself with Iran and Shia militias, and even to some extent the Shia-led government. Especially
if those militias are not well controlled and they wind up committing atrocities after conquering cities and things like that. And if we are the Air Force for that, that's not good, it seems to me, by my lights and so on. So there are, I mean, they're definitely difficult, and it's also bad for the U.S. to be perceived that way in the Sunni world as abetting any kind of ethnic cleansing or anything.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, and I think the problem was more with the Winnep report is more the emphasis, because the emphasis really is on the notion that Iran really or I would say the implication is that Iran represents the greater threat. Under no circumstances should we be backing forces backed by Iran, lest we essentially, unless we can displace Iran's influence over those forces. Mm-hmm. But this is a very, very very narrow tightrope to be walking at this point in the Sunni-Shia divide. And Winnep has a certain preference for, say, the Sunni side of things, in part, I think, because they consider that Saudi Arabia at this particular point is kind of more aligned with Israel, and that's a major concern of Winnep, because after all, Winnep is a spin-off from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, so they have a pro-Israel bias. So they kind of lean more to the Sunni interpretation, whereas I think the Obama administration wants to establish some kind of equilibrium between the two. But it's a very awkward equilibrium. Right. And it's a very narrow tightrope.
And ultimately, this brings us back to the Iran deal, the Iran nuclear deal that's being negotiated, because in a way what we're seeing, with neoconservatives and others involved is an evolution of their position toward Iran that originally that certainly got articulated in forceful ways in the context of the Iran deal. So we should pretty soon back up and start there. I want to say one more thing that I think Martin Indyk, who I believe is a founder of Winnep, and I believe he's been pretty explicit in saying, I forget where, look, it's going to be Sunni versus Shia. We got to pick sides. Let's go with the Sunni. Somewhere he put it almost that baldly.
Yeah, he did. There was a brief on this on the Brookings website, he's the vice president of Brookings, and he did kind of lay out kind of the three options and indicated a preference for let's not abandon our traditional allies, mm-hmm. which of course include both Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. Now, that was written before the Yemen kind of campaign began, and that's where, what's really, I think that's a very significant campaign. It's obviously directed by the Saudis against Iran, but it's kind of symbolic, and what it is it's completely destroying a country that was already on the edge, which should in my opinion, offer us some greater insight into the, let's just say, the costs of being seen as backing the Sunni side. Because, mm-hmm. We're creating a major humanitarian crisis, or we're by backing Saudi Arabia in this. I know that the administration is trying to get the Saudis to suspend what they're doing and get to the peace table and make concessions. But so far, it seems that it hasn't had much effect. And I think it's just a very, very worrisome development. And maybe it would cause someone like Indyk to kind of reconsider his preference.
Yeah, because we should say he's not generally identified as a neocon, although he does have this connection to Winnep. He's one of a number of people who've been at Brookings who some people might accuse of being kind of neocon light or something or other, or at times throwing their influence in the direction of neocon causes. But he's certainly not identified as a neocon.
I wouldn't.
And he certainly doesn't sing the tune the neocons would sing about Israel-Palestine. I think he was Obama's emissary or whatever, and he was quite critical of Israel after that broke up.
Yes. No. I think that's right. I don't think he is a neocon. He definitely cares deeply about the security of Israel, right. And he has a whole history of that, but that does not a neocon make, per se, right.
Now,
by definition.
Now, this brings us back to the Iran deal, one more point on Yemen first, but beyond the humanitarian concerns, we have empowered, the Saudi policy that we support of bombing has actually helped Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Al-Qaeda is the very thing we spent so many drones trying to minimize the influence of in Yemen, and the Saudi bombing campaign seems to have given Al-Qaeda in Yemen a little bit of a reprieve.
Remember that's been for some time, for some years now, designated by the U.S. intelligence community as the greatest threat to the U.S. homeland. So it's not just some little Al-Qaeda branch sitting in southern Libya or in Sirte, Libya, or something like that. This, at least according to the intelligence community, is a serious threat to the American homeland. And that, again, is one reason why the Obama administration, I think, is pressing the Saudis to please kind of stop what they're doing and let's think about what's going on. Now, and then also, it's not directly relevant to the point you want to lead to, but I think it's important to note that we've had a couple of bombings claimed by ISIS in Saudi Arabia against Shia mosques or in Shia areas, which means that the war in some ways is coming home to Saudi Arabia. And that, coupled with the kind of palace coup that followed the death of King Abdullah and the rise of the new defense minister in Saudi Arabia, I think there's reason to believe that Saudi Arabia may not be quite as stable as we have always assumed it to be. And that's another thing that I would hope would weigh on the minds of policymakers as they face the kinds of decisions that you're presenting regarding, well, do you side with the Sunni and in which conflicts, or do you side with the Shia in these other conflicts and so on? I think there's some really disturbing developments coming out of Saudi.
How do you think concerns about Saudi stability, internal stability, should factor into these decisions?
Well, I don't think I think they go against the notion of putting your bets on the Sunnis, on Saudi-led Sunnis. I think they should create serious doubts about the agenda and reliability of Saudi Arabia, both even in the short term.
Okay. Now about this Iran deal. So, rewind, 5 years or more since this Iran deal has been in negotiation. There's been a fair amount of domestic opposition to it, much of it emanating from either neocons or people you might identify as kind of, quote, pro-Israel hawks. I generally put pro-Israel in quotes in my mind because I think nominally pro-Israel people often actually don't serve Israel's interests, but whatever, they're identified that way. And initially, it was like opposition to Iran enriching any uranium at all after a deal, which would have killed a deal, and many people thought was designed to kill a deal. As time has gone on, I think there are more and more people who think it may be hard to stop a deal, although it's certainly not a done deal. And I gather there is some of the people who are in this game of shaping opinion in Washington and expressing opinion in Washington and are on that side, who are opposed to the deal, I gather are doing some repositioning, are preparing themselves for the actual event of a deal, and after which the object of the game would be to kind of minimize Iran's engagement with the world, especially with the United States. Is that part of what we're seeing here?
That's kind of what I see. I've been away for a couple of weeks. We've been back for a few days, but yeah, I think that's what's going on. I think there's more and more resignation that a deal is inevitable. I don't think AIPAC just put out a call last week that actually returned to Netanyahu's longstanding demands that there should be complete dismantlement of the nuclear infrastructure in Iran. So I think there's still going to be efforts to derail the deal even after a deal is achieved. It could come through the Corker-Cardin legislation, a resolution to disapprove and see whether somehow they can overcome a veto. I don't think that's likely at this point. I don't think it's probable at this point, but I think an effort will be made in that direction. I think there may be other kinds of legislation coming forward that will be designed to limit the ability of Obama to make any kind of rapprochement on any number of fronts with Iran. But yeah, I think the notion that a deal is indeed coming and that it'll be very difficult to reverse, and the only is increasingly accepted among the foes of a deal. For example, even as long as like 3 weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal which is very much opposed to anything having to do with Iran that's favorable. They editorialized in a way that said, well, essentially we're giving up until the next president. And hopefully Congress will set the groundwork for the next president to repudiate a deal. So they're looking in that direction. But at the same time, I think they're trying to change the terms of the debate in ways, as we've seen in the Winnup report, which suggests that in order to reassure our Sunni allies in the Gulf and elsewhere after a deal is signed, we need to aggressively confront Iran in any number of ways and on many different fronts. And that's increasingly the argument now. We have to show that we remain hostile to Iran.
Mm-hmm. Now, there had been a school of thought that all along opposition to an Iranian deal, opposition by Israel, or at least certain politicians in Israel, not everyone in the national security establishment there, but opposition to a deal from within Israel and from some domestic quarters in the United States, notably neocons, that the opposition had really not been rooted so much in genuine fear that Iran might use a nuclear weapon against Israel, but was to a considerable extent a fear of Iran being reintegrated into the world, and in particular approaching anything like détente with the United States. Now, do you know what it is about that? I mean, I genuinely don't understand quite why Israel finds Iran so terrifying. There may be, a lot of people in Israel clearly do, and genuinely do. They're not making it up.
Right.
But I don't quite understand either that reaction, like why is Iran so much more threatening than any number of national security threats, other threats you face, or why there's in particular the fear of what would happen if Iran became like a respectable, member of the community of nations.
Well, I mean, in many ways, I don't fully understand it myself, but I agree with you. I think that the fear of Iran is genuinely held. I think a lot of it, well, of course, Iran is an avowed enemy, a self-avowed enemy of Israel. Mm-hmm. And you can't find that many states in the region who are self-avowed or so self-avowed and have been so self-avowed hostile to Israel over such a long period of time. And I think the Israelis take that seriously, and I can understand why they take that seriously. I think, however, there's also a really great fear about Hezbollah, and
which is supported by Iran, of course.
Which is supported by Iran, and Iran, I think, will let Assad go before it lets Hezbollah go. I mean, at one point, that is in May of 2003, did they indicate that they might reevaluate their relationship with Hezbollah if some kind of grand bargain could be reached with the United States. But even now, I think that's highly questionable. Mm-hmm. And, Hezbollah essentially gave Israel a really bloody nose in 2006. And Israel knows very well that Hezbollah has the firepower, the missiles that can create havoc in Israel.
I mean, it was a bloody nose more symbolically than really. Almost everyone killed in that war was in Lebanon, not Israel. But
in terms of the military to military engagement, it was roughly 2-1. You had a ground force of about 40,000 Israelis against about 5,000 to 10,000 Hezbollah militiamen. Mm-hmm. And the Israelis were really surprised by the resistance.
Well, that was when they went into Lebanon to try to clean out the pockets.
But they lost more than 40 people within just a couple. I mean, it was the highest daily losses they had sustained since the 1967 war. In other words, this was a serious war in a sense. They were lucky to get out further damage to themselves, although clearly Lebanon and Hezbollah also suffered great damage. But Hezbollah is a battle-hardened force that has a mission which in many ways Israel itself helped create just by its incredibly stupid policies when it invaded Lebanon, South Lebanon first in 1978.
And pursuing Yasser Arafat, who was there at that time, right? They invaded.
Right, but completely alienated the Shia population in doing so. That their occupation of southern Lebanon was a complete disaster, and their war in 1982 was in many ways a disaster, and then their continued occupation just made things worse.
Right. And then there's some, maybe a little more intermittent, but there's Iranian support for Hamas as well. That seems
more, I think, Islamic Jihad, but yeah, I mean, I think that bothers them, but I mean, the extent to which Iran can really provide material support to anyone in Gaza is, I think, quite limited compared to what it can provide and has provided to Hezbollah.
I mean, I guess the reason I kind of puzzle over this a little is, one is just, it's a whole lot easier to not feel threatened when you're not in the country that's threatened, right? I mean, America totally freaked out after 9/11, and, countries freak out when they're the ones under attack, and so it's part of it is just it's easy for me to sit here and in a game theoretical way say, well, what's Israel so concerned about? But when I do that, what I think is both Iran and Hezbollah seem to me to have shown themselves to be pretty rational actors. I mean, after you're right that I guess Hezbollah gave Israel a bloody nose. On the other hand, Hezbollah got a sufficiently bloody nose, and it annoyed enough people in Lebanon how much destruction they had invited in Lebanon that, there hasn't been, anything like it since. And similarly, there was a little tit for tat recently that I thought was interesting where Israel, what did they do? They actually killed, I think, an Iranian general or something. It was an attack on Hezbollah in Syria that actually killed an Iranian general. Now, that's like a serious thing in terms of...
Yeah, that was in mid-January.
And Iran/Hezbollah settled for a very modest tit for tat, I thought. I mean, compared to that. I forget, they killed a few soldiers or something, but it wasn't anything like... They killed two
soldiers, but back in the Sheba Farms area. I think that what they were trying to do... Well, Aurélie Daher, who's a French Lebanese expert on Hezbollah, has written on our blog that essentially Hezbollah responded by trying to restore what they thought were the rules of the game, which is any action that takes place should be around contested territory, which is around the Sheba Farms area in southern Lebanon. So they replied in southern Lebanon as opposed to in Syria.
Yeah, and it seemed like Israel actually accepted that. I mean, they said, okay, you get to hit us back, because we actually, I don't know if Israel even realized they were killing an Iranian general, but it's like a big thing, and Israel basically said, okay, you can hit us back, and then they did not retaliate. But the point is, both of them behaved like basically rational actors, and I think Iran's history, by and large, there was a period, 20 more years ago, when Iran was doing more terrorism around the world. But anyway, I wonder a little why the threat is deemed so great. But in any event, it is, and that.
Well, I think there's another aspect to it, Bob, and there's a similar fear that's reflected by the Saudis, which is, I think Israel, like Saudi Arabia, sees the contest with Iran as a zero-sum game. And therefore, any rapprochement between the United States and Iran will be to the detriment of Israel's influence and power in the region and influence in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. I mean, Iran is a really big country, It has
Right.
a large population, a relatively quite well educated population,
Exactly.
a lot more sophistication than the Gulf states and its other allies.
Right.
And just the fact that it's, quote, admitted back into the community of nations, or whatever the expression is, and the fact that sanctions will be reduced against it or ultimately lifted altogether will make it de facto a more powerful factor in regional geopolitics.
Yeah.
And because I think of this perception of zero sum, I think the Israelis fear what the implications may be. I mean, one of the things they say now is like, well, if sanctions are lifted, as Obama presumably intends to do relatively shortly after a deal is done, Iran's suddenly going to get about $150 billion of its own money that's been frozen. And what are they going to do with that money? And the answer that they fear is, well, they're going to send more missiles to Hezbollah. They're going to do various things that will enhance their influence and power in the region in quite tangible ways. And I think the Israelis and the Gulfies are very worried about that because they don't see a plus sum game on offer.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would put the non-zero sum scenario, I guess, is that partly is that, it's true that the regime has this very anti-Israeli, anti-American narrative and a lot of that kind of rhetoric. But it seems to me that in general, what you see in world affairs is that when you have a regime that relies on that sort of xenophobia to shore up its support, the more isolated it gets, the more extreme the rhetoric gets. I mean, you're seeing this with Putin in Russia, and if anything, in the long term, is going to drain the force of a xenophobic narrative. It's probably going to be, in the long run, at least, I would think, reintegration into the world. Now, whether that can be done gracefully or not is a tough call because you do have the supreme leader who wants to remain the supreme leader, and he's at this point very attached to that narrative. Historically, the regime is very attached to that narrative, whereas the president, I think not so much. He's somebody who's much more Western friendly. So anyway, that's what it seems to me that's a possibility that it would actually make sense to explore from both an American and Iranian point of view. And I suspect that maybe in the Obama administration there are people who find that sufficiently plausible to want to pursue that kind of scenario.
Well, I think that's the theory on which they're kind of proceeding. And certainly that's the neoconservative critique of the administration. The neoconservatives, like somebody like Michael Duran, who's at Hudson now, he's made the argument in any number of fora that the administration is totally naive because it assumes that just reintegrating Iran into the international community is going to soften its revolutionary actions and messages and so on. And how stupid can you get? Because these people are convinced revolutionaries. They're apocalyptic in their vision, and they present a never-ending danger to U.S. and Israeli and related interests. And it's just silly to think otherwise. I personally am not persuaded by that, or else I'd be a neoconservative.
Is this a guy who was at Brookings until recently?
That's correct, yeah. And he's written some very influential essays in Mosaic magazine. He kind of laid out that Obama has a secret strategy, and his secret strategy is to pursue the grand bargain that Iran purportedly offered in 2003 in hopes that, somewhat like China, Iran can be brought into the system peacefully, that its external policies will moderate considerably, it'll be a reasonable actor, it'll even be friendly on a number of important issues like Afghanistan and Iraq, and we can deal with it. And Duran thinks this is all naive nonsense. And that indeed is increasingly the definition of the neoconservative position about their critique of the administration's desire to strike a deal and achieve some kind of rapprochement.
Mm-hmm. So is the concern more that, I mean, in a way, I wonder whether the concern is really with rapprochement or with non-rapprochement in the sense, I mean, one of the feared scenarios is that, like, Iran will take the money and run. In other words, they'll take sanctions relief, but they will not do things that would endear them to the United States, like lessening support for Hezbollah or anything, and they'll be willing to remain largely alienated from the international community once they've got the sanctions relief. That's one concern. That seems to me a little more plausible, at least, than the other concern, I think, which is that, they will pursue this rapprochement with the U.S. The U.S. will fall in love with them. They'll become best friends of Iran, and Iran will proceed to pose a more and more genuine national security threat to Israel until actually, the time of annihilation or whatever. I think it seems to me if you have even a rudimentary understanding of American domestic politics, there's a limit to how close we would be able to get to Iran while Iran was posing a genuine, an urgent national security threat to Israel, right? I can't imagine both of those things happening at the same time. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think your analysis is correct. And I think, but neoconservatives kind of tends to be apocalyptic too.
Right. I mean, they do.
It's entirely plausible to them that Iran, I mean, I think, Netanyahu himself said that in his security cabinet deliberations, according to Israeli reporters who got leaks, said that his greatest fear was that Iran was going to comply with the nuclear agreement for the next 10 or 15 years, because that would be totally contrary, in his view, to Israeli interests. Not only because at the end of it, Iran would be a nuclear threshold state, which he found threatening, but also because Iran would no longer be isolated from the international community and international financial system. Mm-hmm. And that would just make it a much more powerful actor, and that power would translate into influence that would still be malign, at least toward Israel. That's his view, I think, as I understand it. But they think that Obama's just being naive, and they think, as you said, that, somehow we're all going to fall in love with Iran, and Iran's going to take us for a ride because they're all carpet merchants, and you know what happens when you enter the bazaar, and all of these stereotypes they kind of bring up to play on our worst fears of being taken and ultimately somehow undone by the other.
Okay, so finally, what about the deal itself, the Iran nuclear deal itself? I mean, supposedly the end of June is like a real deadline, and this time they really mean it. But now I'm already hearing that, well, actually, no, things could drag on another couple of weeks. And then today or yesterday, inauspiciously, Secretary of State Kerry, after meeting with the Iranians, promptly went out and broke his leg in a bicycle accident. Anyway, I think most people have recently been thinking the chances are there will be a deal, if not by the end of June, then shortly thereafter. And then it may be that Congress can do something in the subsequent several months to sabotage it. So that's a second question. But if they fail, then it'll be on a more solid footing. What's your take on the current situation?
I don't pretend to have any special insight into it. I've heard, the same reports that you have. I think the fact that Kerry broke his leg and had to come back for medical treatment in Switzerland, I guess didn't quite make the bar. So
no, you know what the deal is on that? I mean, this is what was reported, and it sounds like it may be true. He had a hip replacement at a specific hospital in Boston, and this is sufficiently related to that he would like the same doctors dealing with this.
Well, no, I can understand it. But I don't think he personally was so important to the deal, because we're really working out technical issues at this point, and I have a feeling he has complete confidence in the other negotiators who are there, and I suspect the Iranians do too. So I'm not sure that itself is important. I found it interesting that I think it was the Times, or maybe it was the Post today, reported or quoted Gary Seymour, who's the president of United Against Nuclear Iran, and therefore, well, at least the organization is hostile to a deal with Iran.
Sure.
I don't think he is so hostile, but he said it wouldn't be bad if they took their time at this point, meaning beyond the June 30th deadline, beyond even early July, and maybe got a deal, in the fall or something like that.
He's long said that, and I'm sufficiently cynical to wonder, given the fact that he is president of United Against a Nuclear Iran, which is a pretty, belligerent group, as a group. I think they lobbied to deny the president of Iran a hotel room when he was coming, when the UN was meeting. Like, they didn't want any American hotels to let him. They wanted him to have to pitch a tent in Central Park. But anyway, I'm sufficiently cynical to ask, well, when he says, hey, no rush, take your time, is he at some level thinking, give it more time to unravel, give us more time to undermine it? Because... Yeah,
I don't exclude that possibility. And you can argue, because... the consensus, 3 Western European, the EU 3 ambassadors spoke in Washington last week at an Atlantic Council forum. And the French ambassador in particular said he didn't actually expect a deal by June 30th, and he thought it might take some time after that. I think it was the British ambassador said that actually it wouldn't be until the end of the year before Iran could show sufficient compliance with implementation in any event so that any sanctions would be lifted. So that's already a 6-month period. So you could say that Seymour is saying, we don't need a deal right away. We can wait. Because then if you add the 6 months from that point of view, well, you're already into the primary season here. And that's when the Republicans will say, oh, no, if they become president, they're going to renounce the deal, et cetera, et cetera. So that may be the tactic that he's following. But I expect we're likely to get a deal, by early July. That's my best guess. But again, I don't have any particular insight into the situation.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the good news on if you're pro deal is it was reported that the Western powers, whatever, the permanent 5 members of the Security Council plus Germany, which constitutes our side of the bargaining table, have agreed to a system of snapback sanctions.
Right.
In other words, a way that you nominally grant Iran pretty full sanctions relief and thus allow the supreme leader to save face because he's demanding that, but have it automatic that if Iran fails to comply with the deal down the road, the sanctions are automatically, or some are automatically re-implemented. And it sounds like our side of the bargaining table is now on the same page on that. We have a proposal to offer.
Yeah, I think there was a report about that. Yeah. I just don't know whether that's absolutely correct. There's still important issues for which there clearly remain some gaps, including pacing of sanctions relief and a couple of other points. But it seems like they're eliminating brackets. Mm-hmm. There have been reports saying that in the last couple of weeks there really hasn't been much progress at all, and that's one of the reasons why Kerry went to Geneva and now he's back home and so on. Mm-hmm. But I think this may be part of the bargaining process.
Mm. Okay, well, thank you, Jim, for taking time out and illuminating this. Everyone should look at LobeLog, LobeLog, .com, .org? Com. And there's a lot of stuff there about foreign affairs from perspectives that are sometimes not heard from and would not be heard from were it not for the work of LobeLog.
Oh, you're so kind, Bob. Thank you very much.
I didn't say they were healthy perspectives. I just said they were perspectives.
Okay.
But I think the more perspectives, the better, and I do actually find it valuable to read it.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Well, thanks a lot.
Okay.
Take care.